My name is Jamie Gile, and I'm 18 years old. Until recently, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was losing my father. I had no idea that grief was only the beginning. About a month ago, my dad's relatives called to tell me his health was getting worse. They tried to sound calm, but I could hear the strain in their voices, the pauses, the careful wording, the way people talk when they're afraid of delivering bad news too directly. My parents had been divorced for years. Dad moved out, and I stayed with my mom. On paper, it worked. Weekends with him, holidays together, occasional dinners that felt like stolen time. But it was never enough. Dad was the one who understood me. He listened instead of interrupting. When things got tense at home, especially after my mom remarried, he was my anchor. Even from a distance, he made me feel seen. So when I heard his condition was declining, I packed my bag the same night. I told myself this was my chance to be there for him, to give back even a fraction of what he'd given me my whole life. I imagined sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, letting him know he wasn't alone. I arrived just in time to lose him. A week after I moved in, Dad had a heart attack. One moment, I was adjusting his blanket, complaining about hospital food, trying to make him smile. The next, alarms were screaming. Nurses rushed in. Someone gently pulled me away as I begged them not to stop. Then everything went quiet. The silence after someone dies is unbearable. It's too loud, too final. I didn't cry right away. I felt hollow, like my chest had been scooped clean. My legs shook, but I stayed standing because sitting felt like surrender. As Dad's only child, everything fell on me. Funeral arrangements, calling relatives, signing papers I barely understood. People kept telling me I was so strong, but strength had nothing to do with it. I was on autopilot. That night I called my mom. I didn't expect comfort. I just expected something. "Mom," I said quietly, "Dad passed away." There was silence on the line, long enough that I checked my phone to see if the call had dropped. I repeated, my voice cracking, "Dad is gone." "I heard you the first time," she replied flatly. "What do you want me to do about it?" The words hit me harder than the news itself. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just hung up. I understood that they were divorced. I knew she'd moved on, remarried, started a new life. But this wasn't about him. This was about me, about her daughter losing her father. All I wanted was a simple, "I'm sorry." I didn't get that luxury. Grief doesn't pause responsibilities. There was a funeral to plan, paperwork to handle, family members who needed updates. A few days later, while I was still trying to keep everything together, my phone rang again. It was my old neighbor. Her daughter and I grew up together, so I assumed she was calling to offer condolences. Instead, she sounded confused. "Jamie," she said carefully, "why didn't you tell us you were moving out?" My stomach dropped. "I'm not," I said. "I'll be back home soon." There was a pause. "Well, your mom's been telling everyone you decided to move. She's been clearing out your room." The room spun. She went on, explaining that my mom had been carrying boxes out of the house, selling things, throwing others away. Neighbors had even seen strangers coming by to pick stuff up. My room, my belongings. While I was away burying my father. I ended the call with shaking hands and immediately dialed my mom. I didn't wait for her to say hello. "How could you sell my things?" I snapped. "How dare you?" She sounded flustered, caught completely off guard. "How did you find out?" she asked. That told me everything. I demanded answers. She finally sighed and said that her husband Greg and his kids needed more space, that they deserved to feel at home too. That's when it clicked. This wasn't cleaning. This was erasure. My guitar, my books, the vintage record player Dad gave me for my 16th birthday. Gone. Items I'd had since childhood, memories tied directly to him, reduced to cash and clutter. I wasn't angry about sharing space. I actually cared about my step-siblings, Ethan and Mia. I would have shared anything if she'd asked. But she didn't ask. She waited until I was gone, until my dad was dead, and she emptied my life out of that house like it never mattered. When I demanded the money for what she'd sold, she admitted she'd already spent it. On gifts for her new family. Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically. It went cold. "My childhood," I said slowly, "paid for their toys." She called me selfish, said I should be grateful she'd moved on, that I was being dramatic during a difficult time. I hung up. That night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. My mother wasn't grieving with me. She was moving on without me. And she had no idea that the house she was rearranging, the room she was erasing, the ground she stood on, was never hers to begin with. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind dragged me back into my room, the version of it that no longer existed. The way my guitar leaned against the wall like it was waiting for me. The uneven stacks of books I always promised myself I'd organize. The dusty record player sitting on my desk, its scratches and dents proof that it had been loved. Dad gave me that record player on my 16th birthday. He'd been so proud of it, grinning like he'd just pulled off some grand surprise. He said music should be listened to slowly, the way memories are made. Now it was gone. Sold. Reduced to cash that had already disappeared into someone else's happiness. By morning, grief had hardened into something sharper. I called my mom again. This time, she answered like she'd been waiting for it. "Jamie," she said, already tired, "I really don't have the energy for another fight." That sentence alone told me she didn't see what she'd done as betrayal, just an inconvenience. "You didn't just sell stuff," I said quietly. "You sold pieces of my dad." She sighed dramatically. "You're being emotional. Greg and the kids are settling in. You're going to college soon. It made sense." "It made sense to do it while I was gone," I snapped. "While I was burying my father?" She paused, but only for a second. "I didn't think you'd want to deal with it." That lie stung more than the truth. "What you didn't want," I said, my voice shaking, "was me coming back." She immediately went defensive. "That's not fair. I carried you for 9 months. I raised you. I sacrificed—" "There it is," I interrupted. "You always use that when you don't want to take responsibility." Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "Where's the money?" Another sigh. "It's gone. Spent on clothes, shoes, electronics, things the kids needed." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because something inside me finally broke. "My childhood," I said slowly, deliberately, "paid for their gifts." She called me selfish, accused me of holding grudges, said I should be happy she'd moved on instead of clinging to the past. That was when I realized something painful. She hadn't moved on from my dad. She'd moved on from me. I hung up before she could say another word. The funeral came and went in a blur. People hugged me, told me how much I looked like him, how proud he'd be of me. Every word felt heavy, like I was carrying his memory alone while everyone else returned to their normal lives. After the service, Uncle Joe stayed behind to help me sort through Dad's things. He moved slowly, respectfully, like every object mattered. We were going through paperwork when he suddenly froze. "Jamie," he said carefully, "did your dad ever mention a will?" I shook my head immediately. Dad hated legal documents. He used to say lawyers ruined families. But there it was, a will, properly written, signed, stored in a safety deposit box Uncle Joe had been instructed to access only if something happened. My hands trembled as I read. Dad had never transferred the house to my mom during the divorce. Not once. Legally, it had remained in his name the entire time, and he left it to me. I felt dizzy, like the room had tilted sideways. Uncle Joe explained everything gently. Dad had moved out to avoid conflict, trusting that things would stay civil. He never imagined my mom would try to push me out. The will was his safety net, for me. At first, I didn't want to act on it. Despite everything, she was still my mom. I told myself we could work something out quietly. No drama, no confrontation. But then I remembered my room, my memories. The way she told me she didn't know what she was supposed to do about my dad dying. That was the moment I stopped protecting her. The next few days were a crash course in adulthood. Legal calls, documents, long conversations with Uncle Joe about rights and timelines. I barely spoke, just listened, nodded, signed where needed. At one point, I even looked at apartment listings. Not for myself, for them. That realization didn't come with guilt. It came with clarity. When everything was ready, I drove back to the house. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, my chest calm in a way it hadn't been since Dad died. I wasn't going home. I was reclaiming it. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what that meant. I didn't walk back into that house alone. When my mom opened the front door and saw Uncle Joe standing beside me, her face froze, like someone had hit pause mid-expression. For half a second, I saw it. Real fear. Then it vanished, replaced by a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Jamie," she said cautiously, "why did you bring a lawyer?" That single question told me she already knew this wasn't a casual visit. Behind her, Greg lounged in the living room chair like a king in his castle. One leg crossed over the other, arms folded. That familiar, smug look plastered on his face, the one he always wore when he thought he had control. He didn't bother standing up. I stepped inside, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "We need to talk." My mom motioned for us to sit, her hands fidgeting as she lowered herself onto the couch. Greg stayed exactly where he was, watching Uncle Joe with thinly veiled irritation. I took a breath. "Do you remember the details of your divorce from Dad?" Her eyebrows knit together. "Of course I do. Why are you asking me this now?" Uncle Joe gently placed a folder on the coffee table and slid it toward her. The room went quiet as she flipped through the papers. Greg leaned forward, curiosity turning into confusion. Then I saw it, the exact moment realization hit. My mom's face drained of color. Greg's confident smirk faltered. Uncle Joe spoke calmly, professionally. "The house was never transferred into your name. Your ex-husband remained the sole legal owner until his death. According to his will, the property now belongs to Jamie." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then my mom exploded. "That's impossible," she shouted, slamming the papers down. "I lived here for years. I raised her here. That has to count for something." Greg shot up from his chair. "You can't just walk in here and take our house. We have kids. Where are we supposed to go?" I didn't raise my voice. "I'm not taking anything," I said evenly. "You were already trying to take it from me." Uncle Joe stepped in, explaining that this didn't have to become a battle, that we could discuss timelines, compensation, options that wouldn't uproot anyone overnight. But Greg wasn't listening anymore. "You planned this," he snapped, pointing at me. "You waited until your dad died and came back to kick us out." I felt something twist inside me, but I didn't break. "I planned to come home," I replied. "You planned to erase me." That's when Greg changed tactics. He stormed out of his room so abruptly that my mom flinched. For a brief moment, I thought he'd finally accepted reality. I was wrong. 20 minutes later, he came back, dragging Ethan and Mia with him. The kids looked confused, scared. Mia clutched Ethan's sleeve, her eyes darting around the room like she'd walked into a nightmare she didn't understand. Greg pointed at them dramatically. "Look at them," he said loudly. "This is what you're doing. You're throwing innocent kids out onto the street. Is that what you want on your conscience?" The room went still. My heart stuttered. For just a second, doubt crept in. I imagined them packing bags, losing their friends, their school, the only home they'd known for the past few years. I glanced at Uncle Joe. His expression was calm but firm. "Don't let him corner you emotionally," he said quietly. I took a deep breath. "I'm not evicting the kids," I said clearly. "They can stay." The relief on my mom's face was immediate, almost smug. Greg exhaled like he'd won. "But," I continued, "you'll be paying rent." The shift was instant. My mom shot to her feet. "Absolutely not. I'm not paying rent in my own home." I met her gaze steadily. "It's not your home anymore." Her face twisted with rage. Greg's hands clenched into fists. "You think you can just flip a switch and become the landlord?" "Yes," I said, "because legally I am." Uncle Joe explained the terms. Fair market value, an independent assessor, a formal agreement. It was more than reasonable. Too reasonable. Greg snapped. Before anyone could react, he shoved Uncle Joe hard in the chest. My uncle stumbled back, barely keeping his balance. Everything happened at once. I rushed to help Uncle Joe as my mom screamed Greg's name. Ethan and Mia recoiled, eyes wide with terror. "That's enough," Uncle Joe said firmly as he pulled out his phone. "Assault is a crime. Sit down." Greg looked unhinged, breathing heavy, pacing, muttering under his breath. The police arrived quickly. Greg tried to laugh it off, claimed it was a misunderstanding. The officers weren't convinced. After taking statements, they issued a stern warning and told him to leave for the night. As he walked out, he turned back to glare at me. "This isn't over," he hissed. The door slammed behind him. The house felt colder after that. I stood there, heart pounding, knowing something had fundamentally changed. He was right about one thing. It wasn't over. But for the first time, the power wasn't in his hands anymore. After the police left, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battlefield after the fighting stopped. Quiet, tense, heavy with everything that had been said and done. The walls seemed to listen. Every creak of the floorboards made my shoulders tighten. My mom avoided me for days. When she did speak, it was never about what happened. Never an apology, never accountability. Instead, she rotated between silence and guilt. One moment she'd walk past me like I didn't exist. The next, she'd corner me in the kitchen, eyes glossy, voice trembling. "After everything I've done for you," she'd whisper. "I carried you for 9 months. I gave up so much." I stopped responding. Arguing with her felt pointless now. Every conversation followed the same pattern. She reframed herself as the victim, erased my pain, rewrote history until I questioned my own memories. Greg didn't come back after that night. At first, my mom said he was giving everyone space. Then she said he was staying with a friend. Then she stopped mentioning him altogether. According to Uncle Joe, men like Greg didn't disappear out of respect. They disappeared when consequences caught up to them. Uncle Joe stayed close. He insisted we document everything: the shove, the threats, the selling of my belongings. He told me to treat this like it could escalate at any moment, because people who lose control don't go quietly. We met with a real estate agent to determine fair market rent. My mom scoffed when she heard the number. "That can't be right," she snapped. "This house isn't worth that much." The agent calmly explained that the rate was actually below average for the neighborhood. She didn't like that. Greg was formally served eviction papers shortly after, citing the violent outburst. When my mom realized this was real, that he wasn't coming back, she broke down, full sobbing, begging me to reconsider, downplaying what he'd done. "He didn't mean it," she said. "He was just emotional." "So was I replied, "for years." That was the first time she had no response. The only light in all of this came from Ethan and Mia. One night they knocked quietly on my door. Mia held a small box in her hands, like it was fragile. "We saved some of your stuff," she said softly. Inside the box was my dad's watch. Scratched, worn, familiar. There were a few other small things, too. Items my mom hadn't sold yet. Things the kids had hidden when they realized what was happening. I sat on the edge of my bed and cried harder than I had since Dad died. They didn't say anything. They just sat with me. A few days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Greg's ex-wife. She asked if we could meet. We met for coffee in a quiet cafe. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She told me everything. Years of unpaid child support, constant excuses, manipulation. Greg had been using his family household as proof he was financially providing, all to avoid paying what he legally owed. That's why he fought so hard to stay in the house. That's why he wanted Ethan and Mia living with him. It was never about family. It was about money. She asked if I'd be willing to testify if it went to court. I said yes without hesitation. Ethan and Mia deserved better than a father who treated them like leverage. When I told my mom what I'd learned, she went pale. For the first time, she looked as blindsided as I'd felt when she sold my belongings. I felt a flicker of sympathy. It passed quickly. Some betrayals don't cancel each other out. The locks were changed. Cameras were installed. Greg was officially out. No more threats. No more pretending. Ethan and Mia started reconnecting with their biological mom. Slowly, carefully, watching them find pieces of themselves again reminded me of something important. Healing isn't loud. It's quiet, intentional, often uncomfortable. I started preparing for college, packing boxes, my boxes this time. The house felt different now. Not perfect, not warm, but safe. And safe was enough. One night, I stood alone in the living room, looking around at the place that had been mine all along. The house my dad never stopped protecting, even when he wasn't physically there. I finally understood what he'd done. He didn't leave me property. He left me security, boundaries, a way out. If standing up for myself made me the villain in my mother's story, so be it. I spent too long being quiet to keep other people comfortable. This time I chose myself. And for the first time since my dad died, I felt like I could breathe again.